The soil in the Willamette Valley does not just grow things, it remembers. It remembers the harsh winters, the late frosts, and the exact amount of care you put into it. For 40 years, Vance Orchards had been my quiet sanctuary. Sitting on 150 acres of premium organic earth, it was a debt-free testament to the life my late wife Sarah and I had built. I stood at the edge of the north block, the morning fog still clinging to the lowest branches of the Honeycrisp trees. I reached into the breast pocket of my faded flannel jacket and pulled out a battered leather pocket ledger. The binding was cracked from years of sweat and rain, the pages filled with decades of meticulously recorded data. Soil pH is holding at exactly 6.5 comma, I said, writing the number down in tight architectural script. I checked the timestamp on my watch and logged that too. Elias Thorne, my farm foreman and the hardest working man I had ever known, wiped his grease-stained hands on a rag. He was 45, built like a cinder block, and possessed a quiet loyalty that most men only read about. The cover crop did its job over the winter, Arthur. We're in for a heavy yield this season. I nodded, sliding the ledger back into my pocket. I looked past the rows of perfectly pruned trees toward the newly renovated guest house sitting a quarter-mile down the property. The driveway was empty. Leo didn't come out this morning, I noted. It wasn't a question. Elias looked down at his boots, clearly uncomfortable. He hated covering for my son, but his protective nature extended to my feelings. He said he had some administrative calls to make, supply chain stuff. You know how it is. I do, Elias, thank you. I knew exactly how it was. My adopted son Leo was 34, but he possessed the work ethic of a man who believed wealth was something that fell from the sky, not something pulled from the dirt. When Sarah and I adopted him at age 9, he was a frightened boy from a broken foster system. We gave him stability, an education, and a debt-free life. I had bailed out 3 of his failed startup ventures, and when he married Chloe, a woman whose ambition far exceeded her willingness to labor, I let them move into the guest house rent-free. I gave Leo the title of co-manager of Vance Orchards, hoping the responsibility would anchor him. Instead, it only inflated his entitlement. I thought providing endless second chances would eventually earn his respect. It was the great flaw of my life, thinking you could audit someone into loving you. That evening, I invited Leo and Chloe up to the main farmhouse for dinner. Chloe arrived wearing pristine designer boots that had never touched actual mud, her phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline. She was 32, styling herself as a lifestyle influencer online, though her primary lifestyle consisted of spending the allowance I quietly deposited into Leo's account each month. "Smells great, Arthur," Leo said, offering a tight, forced smile as he sat down. He looked tired, weighed down by the constant pressure of keeping his wife accustomed to a standard of living he could not provide. I served the roast and sat at the head of the table. For a few minutes, the only sound was the clinking of silverware. Finally, I cleared my throat. "I have an announcement," I said, my voice steady and quiet. "I'm tired. The harvest is looking good, but my joints aren't what they used to be. I've decided to take a trip, 4 weeks off-grid fishing up in remote Alaska. No cell service, no internet. Just me and the water." Leo froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Alaska? For a month? Dad, you never take time off." "It's overdue," I replied. I reached into my pocket and placed the heavy leather-bound farm checkbook on the table, sliding it toward Leo. "You're the co-manager. The farm is in your hands while I'm gone. There's enough in the operational account to cover payroll, fuel, and emergencies. Elias will handle the physical labor, but the decisions are yours." Chloe's eyes darted to the checkbook, a sudden, sharp hunger flashing across her features before she quickly masked it with a sweet smile. "That's so wonderful for you, Arthur. You deserve a break. Don't worry about a thing here. We'll take perfect care of the estate." "I know you will," I said softly. The next morning, the sun was barely breaking the horizon as I loaded a single duffel bag into the bed of my battered 2012 Ford F-150. The air was crisp and biting. Before leaving, I realized I needed to drop off the master keys to the equipment shed at the guest house. I walked the gravel path quietly, avoiding the crunch of the larger stones out of pure habit. As I approached the porch, the kitchen window was cracked open, letting the heat of a running coffee maker spill into the cool morning air. Inside, voices were hushed but urgent. "I don't like this, Chloe." Leo was pacing, his voice trembling with anxiety. "It's federal wire fraud. It's forgery. If he checks the accounts..." "Leo, stop being a coward." Chloe's voice was like ice, sharp and completely devoid of affection. "He's going to be in the middle of nowhere for a month. By the time he gets back, the escrow will be closed and the money will be offshore. What is he going to do? He doesn't understand modern banking." "He built this place, Chloe." I heard the sound of her slamming a ceramic mug on the counter. "He's just an old dirt farmer, Leo. By the time he figures out how to check his bank account, we'll be in Monaco. He gave you the checkbook to play farm manager, but we are taking the farm. Are you with me, or are you going to be a broke farmhand for the rest of your life?" I stood perfectly still on the porch, my breath plumed in the cold air. There was no sudden rush of tears. There was no urge to kick the door open and scream. 30 years of my previous career had burned the impulse for dramatic confrontations out of me. Instead, a cold, surgical clarity settled over my mind. I gently set the master keys on the wooden railing of the porch, turning away before Leo could answer. I didn't need to hear his response. His silence was compliance. I walked back to my truck, climbed into the cab, and started the engine. But instead of turning north toward the Seattle airport to catch a bush plane to Alaska, I turned onto the interstate and headed south, straight toward the glass and steel skyline of Portland. Chloe was right about one thing. Arthur Vance was an old dirt farmer. What she didn't know was that before I retired to the Willamette Valley to grow apples with my late wife, I spent 32 years as a lead forensic auditor for the Internal Revenue Service's Criminal Investigation Division. I hunted ghosts. I tracked offshore shell corporations, dismantled wire fraud syndicates, and followed paper trails that powerful people swore were invisible. Retirement had been too quiet, so I had eventually taken up highly classified freelance work. I was currently the elite due diligence consultant on retainer for one of the largest agricultural conglomerates on the West Coast. I didn't own the company. I didn't need to. They paid me thousands of dollars a day to audit their massive land acquisitions and ensure they weren't buying stolen goods. People lie, they cry, they scream, and they manipulate. But ink does not lie, timestamps do not lie, routing numbers do not lie. Every action leaves a receipt. 3 days later, I sat in my minimalist apartment in downtown Portland. I had traded my worn flannel and denim for a tailored charcoal suit and a silk tie. My silver hair was neatly combed, and my pocket ledger sat squarely beside my laptop. My phone rang. It was Marcus Sterling, the vice president of acquisitions for Ceres AgriCorp. "Arthur, glad you're in town," Marcus said, his voice buzzing with corporate energy. "I have a priority file. We're pushing through a massive cash buy, premium organic acreage down in the valley. The seller is extremely motivated, but it's a $6 million cash deal, and legal wants your eyes on the escrow chain before we fund it." "Send it over, Marcus," I said calmly. "I'll begin the preliminary audit immediately." "Check your email. It's a beautiful piece of land, Arthur, truly. The kind of place you'd retire to." I opened my secure inbox and clicked on the encrypted file Ceres had just transmitted. The PDF loaded, filling my screen with overhead satellite imagery, soil reports, and a property deed. I stared at the screen, my heart beating in a slow, measured rhythm. The GPS coordinates were my coordinates. The soil reports were the ones I had logged in my own leather ledger. The photos showed my Honeycrisp trees and my 2012 Ford F-150 parked near the barn. The target property Ceres AgriCorp was trying to buy was Vance Orchards. I leaned back in my leather chair, staring at the forged signature of Arthur Vance on the preliminary letter of intent. Chloe wasn't just planning to drain the operational accounts. She was selling my entire $6 million estate out from under me, using a fake identity directly to the corporation that had hired me to audit the sale. I reached out, picked up my favorite fountain pen, and opened my worn leather ledger. "Let's see how deep you want to dig this hole, Chloe," I whispered to the empty room. I clicked approve for Phase 2 due diligence and sent the file back to Marcus. The trap was officially open. There is a distinct difference between the silence of an empty farmhouse and the silence of a corporate office on the 42nd floor. A farmhouse breathes. You hear the settling wood, the wind against the glass, the distant hum of the highway. But the glass-walled consulting suite Series AgriCorp provided for me in downtown Portland was perfectly, surgically dead. It was the ideal environment for an autopsy. It was day 4 of my supposed fishing trip. I sat at my mahogany desk, the morning light reflecting off the Willamette River far below, and opened the digital file for the acquisition of Vance Orchards. Chloe had been busy. Over the past 72 hours, she had submitted a mountain of preliminary paperwork to the Series Acquisitions portal. I downloaded the PDFs, bypassing the glossy executive summaries to look at the metadata, the digital footprints that amateurs never think to erase. She had formed an entity called Vance Holdings, LLC, exactly 6 days prior. The registered agent was a strip mall mailbox in Salem. To the untrained eye of a junior corporate lawyer, it looked like a standard estate planning vehicle used by aging farmers to liquidate assets. But I wasn't a junior lawyer. I spent 3 decades at the IRS Criminal Investigation Division tracking phantoms. I pulled the incorporation documents and stared at the signature at the bottom of the page, Arthur Thomas Vance. I leaned closer to the monitor. It was a decent forgery, likely traced from an old tax return she had dug out of my home office. But forgery is about fluid dynamics. When you sign your own name, the pen glides with muscle memory, leaving lighter ink on the curves and heavier pools where you stop. When you trace, your hand hesitates. The pressure is uniform. The ink is dead. Chloe had traced my name with a heavy, terrified hand. With that one document, she had escalated her ambition from a family dispute into state-level identity theft. My burner phone vibrated on the desk. It was a prepaid device I had left with Elias Thorne before I departed, strictly for emergencies. I picked it up. "Go ahead, Elias." "Arthur." Elias's voice was a low, tight whisper. I could hear the grinding roar of heavy diesel machinery in the background. "I'm out behind the equipment shed. We have a problem. There are 3 white utility trucks parked on the north block." I kept my voice perfectly level. "Who do they belong to?" "A commercial surveying crew," Elias said, the anger practically vibrating through the speaker. "Leo told me they were just running an advanced agricultural soil study, but they brought a heavy auger, Arthur. They aren't pulling topsoil. They're drilling deep core samples to check the bedrock. You only do that if you're planning to pour hundreds of tons of concrete." I closed my eyes. The north block was where Sarah and I had planted the first row of Honeycrisp trees 30 years ago. I knew every knot in that wood. "They're tearing up 2 rows of the mature trees to get their trucks in," Elias continued, his voice breaking slightly. "I went to run them off, but Leo stepped in. He ordered me back to the barns, told me if I interfered with his management, I was fired. Arthur, say the word, and I will walk down there and physically throw them off your land." It was a loyalty test, and Elias was passing it at the risk of his own livelihood. He didn't know about the sale. He only knew the land was being disrespected, and he was willing to lose his job to protect it. "No, Elias," I said softly. "Arthur, they are ripping up the roots." "I know," I interrupted, the tightness in my chest betraying my calm tone. "Listen to me very carefully. You need to let them work. Do not confront Leo. Do not threaten the surveyors. You let them take their core samples, and you stay entirely out of their way. Can you do that for me?" There was a long, agonizing pause on the other end of the line. The sound of a diesel engine revving echoed through the phone. "It's your farm, Arthur," Elias finally said, though the defeat in his voice was heavy. "If you say let them drill, I'll let them drill." "Thank you, Elias, but I need you to do one thing for me. Get a clear photograph of anyone who looks out of place." 2 hours later, my secure email pinged. Elias had sent a high-resolution photo taken from the loft of the main barn. The image showed 3 men in corporate windbreakers, Series AgriCorp regional scouts, standing near the drilling rig. Shaking hands with one of the scouts was a 4th man. He was wearing a faded flannel shirt, worn denim, and a battered work coat. He had silver hair and a trimmed gray beard. "Who is this guy?" Elias's text read. He just introduced himself to the foreman as Arthur Vance. Leo stood right next to him and nodded. I zoomed in on the imposter's face. A cold, hollow laugh escaped my chest, echoing in the quiet office. It was Martin Silas. He was a moderately talented local theater actor and a heavily dedicated alcoholic who frequented a tavern in the next town over. He and I shared a passing physical resemblance. If you were a corporate suit from Portland who had never met a real farmer and only expected to see a rustic old man in a plaid shirt, Martin fit the bill perfectly. Chloe hadn't just forged my name. She had hired a body double to bypass the physical inspection requirements of the sale. She truly believed that corporate due diligence was nothing more than shaking a dirty hand and checking a box on a clipboard. It was time to close the doors behind her. I printed the photos, slipped them into a manila folder, and walked down the hall to the corner office of Marcus Sterling. Marcus was pacing behind his desk, speaking rapidly into a Bluetooth headset while analyzing a spreadsheet. When he saw me, he tapped his earpiece to end the call and smiled brightly. "Arthur, tell me good news," Marcus said, leaning against his glass desk. "The regional scouts just called in from the valley. They said the Vance property is pristine. The seller was a bit of a quiet country type, but entirely cooperative. The core samples are coming back solid. Can we move on this?" I opened my folder, keeping the photo of Martin Silas hidden at the back, and handed Marcus the preliminary LLC documents. "The seller's paperwork is highly motivated," I said smoothly, tapping the forged signature with my index finger. "The entity formation is complete. There are no existing liens on the acreage, and the title is clear. The seller is requesting a 60-day escrow, but given the market volatility, I'd advise a different approach." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What do you suggest?" "Expedite the escrow process," I said, looking him directly in the eye. "Push for a 2-week close. If you wave the $6 million cash in front of them right now, they'll lock in. If you wait 60 days, they might get another appraisal and realize the land is actually worth $6.20 million. You need to close this trap before they realize what they're giving up." Marcus grinned, completely oblivious to the double meaning of my words. He loved the idea of beating a rural farmer out of $200,000. "I love how you think, Arthur. You're a shark in a tailored suit. I'll have legal draft the expedited escrow agreements right now. Make sure they send the wire transfer request forms to the seller today," I added as I turned toward the door. "Let's see where they want the money sent." I returned to my office and watched the sun dip lower over the Portland skyline. The real work of an auditor is waiting. You build the parameters, and you wait for the target to step inside them voluntarily. At 4:45 p.m., a notification popped up on my encrypted portal. "New document uploaded, Vance Holdings LLC, escrow wire instructions." I opened the PDF. It was a standard banking routing form, bearing another sloppy forgery of my signature. But the data entered into the fields was what mattered. Chloe hadn't used a local credit union. She had routed the $6 million payout to a newly opened corporate account in Delaware, nested beneath a holding company in the Cayman Islands. She had likely paid a shady online broker thousands of dollars in advance fees to set up the offshore shield, assuming it would make the money untouchable by the time I returned from my fake Alaskan fishing trip. She didn't realize that crossing state lines and international borders with a fraudulent real estate transaction didn't just make it theft. It elevated the crime to federal wire fraud, carrying a mandatory minimum sentence. I reached into my breast pocket and pulled out my battered leather ledger. Just a week ago, I had used this book to log the pH levels of the soil she was currently destroying. I flipped past the pages of agricultural data to a fresh, blank sheet. I clicked my fountain pen and began to write. I logged the date, the exact timestamp of the upload, the IP address embedded in the PDF metadata, which mapped perfectly to the Wi-Fi router in my guest house. I carefully transcribed the Delaware routing numbers and the Cayman Holding Company ID. I drew a neat architectural line under the final number. The trap was fully armed. Now, all I had to do was give them enough rope to hang themselves. In forensic auditing, you learn that the difference between a mistake and a felony is the opportunity to correct it. A mistake is when someone fills out a routing number incorrectly and apologizes when you flag it. A felony is when you point out the discrepancy and they double down with forged documents to justify it. I didn't want to trap my son on a technicality. I wanted to give him every possible off-ramp to stop what he was doing. On day 9 of my supposed Alaskan fishing trip, I sat in Marcus Sterling's office at Ceres AgriCorp, looking over the escrow timeline. The offshore routing to the Cayman Holding Company is highly irregular for a domestic agricultural purchase, I told Marcus, tapping my pen against the glass table. It triggers our anti-money laundering protocols. We can't fund this without additional verification. Marcus frowned, adjusting his silk tie. I don't want to spook the seller, Arthur. We're getting a premium asset at a steep discount. What do you need to clear it? I need a high-resolution color scan of the seller's government-issued photo ID, and it needs to be notarized by a licensed third party, I said smoothly. If they provide that, the compliance department will greenlight the wire transfer. Marcus nodded, immediately typing out the email to Chloe's fake LLC. I walked back to my office and waited. By requesting that specific document, I was forcing Chloe to make a choice. She could realize the corporate requirements were too strict, abandon the fraud, and walk away. Or she could manufacture a fake government ID with Martin Silas's face on it, crossing the threshold into aggravated identity theft, a crime that carried a mandatory federal prison sentence. 2 days passed. The tension of waiting was broken late on a Tuesday night when my burner phone buzzed on the nightstand of my corporate apartment. It was Elias. Arthur. His voice was hoarse, fighting to be heard over the deafening, rhythmic roar of the farm's massive diesel frost fans. Elias, why are the fans running? The temperature hasn't dropped below 40. I know, Elias shouted over the noise. I had to turn them on to drown out the noise from the main house. I'm out in the south block trying to get the organic pesticide sprayed before tomorrow's rain, and I'm doing it alone. I sat up in bed, rubbing my eyes. Where's Leo? Partying. Elias spat the word out like poison. They moved out of the guest house and took over your home 3 days ago. There are a dozen cars parked on the front lawn, caterers, champagne, and Arthur. Leo bought a brand new $110,000 luxury SUV this morning. Dealer tags are still on it. I closed my eyes. The cold reality of their financial suicide washed over me. Escrow hadn't even closed, and they were already spending the $6 million. They had likely gone to a predatory high-interest bridge lender, using the fraudulent Ceres letter of intent as collateral to get a massive cash advance. He told the crew he was retiring, Elias continued, his voice thick with exhaustion and disgust. Told us we all answer to some corporate management firm next month. Arthur, I'm working a double shift to keep this crop alive, but I don't know what I'm saving it for. A heavy, aching guilt settled in my chest. Elias was breaking his back to protect a legacy my own son was dismantling. You're saving it for me, Elias, I said, my voice dropping to a hard, absolute whisper. Do not quit. Keep your head down for 5 more days. I promise you, when I get back, the only people leaving that farm will be Leo and Chloe. 5 days, Elias repeated, breathing heavily. All right, Arthur, 5 days. The next morning, the notification I had been waiting for arrived. Chloe had uploaded the requested document to the Ceres portal. I opened the PDF. It was a scanned Oregon driver's license. The name printed on it was Arthur Thomas Vance. The address was my farmhouse. But the photograph, staring back at me with a dull, slightly confused expression, was Martin Silas, the local theater actor. Beside the ID was a forged notary stamp, likely bought online. Chloe had chosen the felony. I printed the forged ID and walked it down the hall. I placed it on Marcus Sterling's desk. Verification is complete, I said. The ID matches the physical description provided by your regional scouts. Marcus grinned, picking up his desk phone. Excellent. Let's get the seller on the line and lock in the closing date. Marcus dialed the number Chloe had provided for Vance Holdings LLC. He activated the sleek triangular speakerphone in the center of his desk. I sat on the leather sofa in the corner of the office, crossing my legs, opening my battered ledger, and uncapping my fountain pen. The phone rang twice before it was answered. Vance Farm, a gravelly, artificially aged voice said. It was Martin. He was using a slight drawl that I had never possessed, playing the role of the rustic farmer exactly how he thought a Portland executive would expect. Mr. Vance, this is Marcus Sterling with Ceres AgriCorp. I have my lead due diligence auditor in the room with me. I didn't speak. I just listened. Ah, well, hello to you both, Martin stammered slightly. Hope the paperwork is all squared away. It is, Marcus said smoothly. We're prepared to fund the $6 million to your holding account. I just wanted to personally thank you for expediting this. We know leaving a family property is difficult. There was a muffled shuffling sound on the other end, like a hand covering a receiver. Then, a new voice came on the line, smooth, confident, and dripping with rehearsed professionalism. Mr. Sterling, this is Chloe Vance, Arthur's daughter-in-law and estate manager. My pen stopped moving across the ledger. I stared at the speakerphone. Ah, Chloe, a pleasure, Marcus said. I assume Arthur is ready for the transition. He is, Chloe said, her voice adopting a tone of fake practice sympathy. To be completely honest with you, Marcus, my father-in-law's health has been rapidly declining. His mind is slipping. The farm is just too much of a burden for him now, and my husband and I are eager to get him the rest he desperately needs. He barely understands the business side of things anymore. I looked down at the ledger in my lap. Beside my thumb was the exact Cayman Islands routing sequence she had submitted, parsed, and logged by a man whose mind was supposedly slipping. I'm sorry to hear about his health, Marcus said, entirely oblivious to the fact that the man they were discussing was sitting 8 feet away in a tailored suit. Which makes it all the more important that we get this closed quickly. Exactly, Chloe agreed seamlessly. There is one final compliance hurdle, Marcus continued, pulling up his calendar. Because this is a multi-million-dollar cash transfer, utilizing offshore accounts, federal regulations prohibit a remote closing. The seller of record must be physically present in our Portland office to sign the final, irrevocable deed in front of our corporate attorneys. The line went dead silent. The panic radiating from the Willamette Valley was almost palpable through the phone. Physically present? Chloe asked, her voice losing a fraction of its polish. I told you, he's very frail. I understand, Marcus replied firmly. But our legal department won't wire $6 million without verifying the man sitting at the table matches the ID we just processed. It will take 10 minutes. He just needs to show up, show his face, and sign the deed. Another long pause. I could imagine Chloe looking at Martin Silas, calculating the risk. She had already spent the advance money. She couldn't back out now without defaulting on the predatory loans. Her greed had cornered her. Of course, Chloe finally said, her arrogance overriding her caution. We can arrange transport for him. When do you need us? This Friday, 10:00 a.m., Marcus said. Our executive boardroom. We'll be there, Chloe promised. The line clicked dead. Marcus leaned back in his chair, clapping his hands together. God, I love this job, Arthur. Clean, fast, and profitable. We're locking down a pristine asset. I stood up, closing my ledger with a soft, definitive thud. I looked at Marcus, knowing that in 48 hours, his perspective on this deal was going to radically change. Make sure you have all the final transfer documents completely drawn up and placed on the table before they arrive, I said calmly. Once they attempt to sign that final deed, the transaction is locked. Will do, Marcus said, making a note. I want you at that table on Friday, Arthur. You cleared the audit. You should be there for the finish line. I slipped the ledger into my breast pocket and buttoned my suit jacket. Don't worry, Marcus, I said, walking toward the heavy glass door. I wouldn't miss it for the world. In my 32 years with the Criminal Investigation Division, I learned that the moment a conspiracy breaks, the room doesn't explode into shouting. It implodes into a desperate, pathetic silence. When the illusion of unearned wealth vanishes, all that remains is the terror of consequence. Marcus Sterling was the first to break the silence in the boardroom. He stood up, his face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and corporate rage. He had almost wired $6 million of Ceres AgriCorp's money to a Cayman Islands shell company. David, Marcus snapped, looking at his lead attorney, gather every document on this table. Call downstairs. Don't let them leave. I already made the call, Marcus, I said softly, picking up my fountain pen and sliding it into my inside pocket. The Portland Police Economic Crimes Division has been waiting in the lobby since 9:30. I told them we might have a live wire fraud attempt in progress. Chloe let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. She dropped to her knees on the expensive corporate carpet, frantically trying to retrieve the fake driver's license she had dropped. Her manicured fingers slipped against the smooth plastic. The heavy glass doors of the boardroom pushed open. Two plainclothes detectives stepped inside, followed by a uniformed officer. They didn't need to ask who the targets were. The guilt in the room was radiating like heat off a freshly paved road. "Arthur Vance?" one of the detectives asked, holding up a badge. "I'm Arthur Vance," I said, pointing to the actor shivering near the windows. "That man is Martin Silas. He is carrying a forged state identification card. The woman on the floor is Chloe Vance. She originated the fraudulent wire transfer instructions currently sitting in your corporate evidence file." "I didn't do it," Martin shrieked, his actor's drawl completely vanishing, replaced by the terrified pitch of a man facing decades in federal prison. "She hired me. I have the text messages on my phone. She paid me $5,000. I'll testify. I'll show you the texts." "Shut up!" Chloe screamed, finally finding her voice. Her designer trench coat twisted awkwardly as the uniformed officer pulled her firmly to her feet, turning her around to apply the handcuffs. The sharp metallic click echoed over the polished mahogany table. She looked at me, her face pale, the arrogance entirely hollowed out. "Arthur, please, please. It was a mistake. We were just in debt. We panicked. Your family. You can't let them do this." I looked at her, feeling absolutely nothing. No anger, no pity. Just the cold exhaustion of a man who had spent too many years enabling a parasite. "You didn't panic, Chloe," I said, my voice steady. "You spent 2 weeks incorporating a fake LLC, routing offshore accounts, and paying an actor to steal my life's work. You made a business decision. Now, you're dealing with the audit." The officers let her out. Martin followed, babbling uncontrollably to the detectives about cooperating as a state witness. That left Leo. My adopted son sat frozen in his heavy leather chair. He hadn't moved. He hadn't defended his wife. He just stared at the silver Montblanc pen sitting uselessly on the glass table. Beside the pen sat the keys to the $110,000 luxury SUV he had purchased just 3 days ago with predatory bridge loans. Slowly, Leo looked up at me. His eyes were red, welling with the tears of a coward who had been caught. "Dad," his voice cracked. "Dad, I swear to God I didn't know how far she was going to take it. She told me it was just an estate transfer. She said you were too tired to run the farm anyway. I was trying to protect your legacy. I'm your son." I walked around the edge of the table and stood beside him. I looked down at the boy I had pulled from a broken foster system 25 years ago. I had given him my name, my home, and every ounce of patience I possessed. I had paid his debts, absorbed his failures, and silently hoped that my unconditional support would eventually teach him how to be a man. I was wrong. Some people mistake a safety net for a hammock. "You didn't want to protect my legacy, Leo," I said quietly. "You just wanted the payout without putting your hands in the dirt." I picked up the heavy keychain with the luxury SUV fob and dropped it squarely onto his lap. "You let them drill through my mature Honeycrisps," I continued, my voice finally dropping to a hard, unforgiving baseline. "You stood in my kitchen and listened to your wife plot to steal my home, and you did nothing." "I didn't know how to stop her," Leo pleaded, tears spilling over his cheeks. "Dad, please, the bridge loans, they're in my name. The lenders advanced us $500,000 against the escrow. If the sale doesn't go through, they'll seize everything. I'll be bankrupt. I'll go to jail. Please, Dad, you have to help me fix this." I reached for my battered leather pocket ledger and picked it up off the glass. "Chloe was right about one thing," I said, looking him dead in the eye, delivering the exact words I had heard him agree to in the kitchen weeks ago. "I'm just an old dirt farmer, Leo, but I know how to check my accounts, and you no longer have access to any of them." Leo buried his face in his hands, sobbing openly in the silent boardroom. "The guest house locks have already been changed," I said, turning my back on him. "Do not ever step foot on my property again." I walked out of the boardroom, leaving my son to face the corporate lawyers and the mountain of unpayable debt he had built with his own 2 hands. The drive south from Portland back to the Willamette Valley takes about an hour, but that afternoon, it felt like a time machine. With every mile that passed, the sterile, ruthless energy of the corporate world faded, replaced by the deep, vital green of the agricultural basin. When I finally turned my battered Ford F-150 onto the gravel driveway of Vance Orchards, The late afternoon sun was casting long, golden shadows across the rows of apple trees. I parked near the main barn. The massive diesel frost fans were silent. Elias Thorne was standing near the equipment shed, covered in grease and pesticide dust, wiping down the spray nozzles of the tractor. He looked exhausted. His shoulders were slumped, and there were dark circles under his eyes from working a week of double shifts. When he heard the crunch of my tires, he looked up. He froze, tossing the rag onto the workbench, and walked slowly toward the truck. I stepped out of the cab, taking a deep breath of the cool, loamy air. "Arthur," Elias said, his voice thick with confusion, "you're back early. Did you catch anything?" I smiled, a genuine tired smile that reached my eyes for the first time in weeks. "I caught exactly what I went looking for, Elias." Elias looked past me toward the main farmhouse. "Leo isn't here. He left for Portland this morning in that new truck. I tried to keep the north block watered, but they really tore up the root systems with those drills." "I know," I said. "Leo isn't coming back, neither is Chloe." Elias stopped wiping his hands, his eyes narrowing as he processed the finality in my tone. "What happened, Arthur?" I reached into my breast pocket, but I didn't pull out the pocket ledger. Instead, I pulled out a freshly notarized legal envelope I had prepared with my personal attorney the day before. I handed it to Elias. "We aren't answering to a corporate management firm," I told him, watching his calloused hands take the envelope. "Open it." Elias carefully broke the seal and unfolded the thick watermarked paper. He read the first few lines, his brow furrowing as he tried to understand the legal phrasing. Then, his eyes widened, locking onto the figures at the bottom of the page. It was a revised operating agreement and a registered deed transfer. "Arthur," Elias breathed, his voice barely a whisper. "This says 20%. This transfers 20% equity of Vance Orchards to me. It makes me a managing partner." "You earned it," I said firmly. "While the people who shared my blood were busy trying to pave over this land, you were out here working unpaid night shifts just to keep the crop alive. You protected the soil, Elias. Now you own a piece of it." Elias looked down at the paper, his massive chest heaving once, fighting back a sudden wave of emotion. He was a man who had worked for an hourly wage his entire life, and with one signature, he had just been handed $1 million in pristine agricultural equity. He looked up at me, his eyes shining. "I don't know what to say. I'll work it until my bones break, Arthur, I swear to you." "I know you will," I said, putting a hand on his shoulder, "but tomorrow we both take the day off." That evening, I sat on the back porch of my farmhouse. The caterer's trash had been cleared away, the luxury cars were gone, and the quiet sanctuary Sarah and I had built was finally mine again. I pulled my worn leather ledger from my pocket and opened it to a fresh page. I flipped past the Delaware routing numbers, past the IP addresses, and past the timestamps of my daughter-in-law's felony fraud. I clicked my fountain pen and wrote down the date. May 14th. Evening temperature, 52 degrees, wind, calm, soil, pH, 6.5. The ledger had returned to its original purpose. The disease of entitlement had been surgically removed from my life, and while the house felt a little emptier, it also felt remarkably clean. You cannot audit someone into loving you, but you can certainly audit them out of your life. I closed the book, set it on the railing, and watched the sun disappear behind the trees, listening to the farm breathe. If you were in Arthur's position, would you have warned Leo before the final boardroom meeting, or did he deserve to face the full weight of the trap? Let me know in the comments.